Dr. Avneet, can we begin?
Yeah, sure.
Fine. Thank you, ma'am. Vikramjeet sir, we'll begin.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, a very good afternoon to all. I welcome you to the third lecture of the Academic Enrichment Lecture Series titled Delhi, the Heritage City, organized by the Department of Elementary Education at Mata Sundari College. The title for today's lecture is Studying Heritage Through Walks, and the speaker for the day is Mr. Vikramjeet Singh Rooprai. Now, I invite Dr. Avneet Kaur, the teacher in charge of Department of Elementary Education, to share a few words about the series that is ongoing. Dr. Avneet.
Thank you, Anshika ma'am. Thank you so much for organizing such an event. I very heartily, first of all, welcome Vikramjeet ji, who has been part of the whole exercise of doing heritage walks at the department. We've invited him before also, earlier also. So, just to brief everybody, the first year, especially who have just joined us, we started with this lecture series with a very important purpose in mind. When the lockdown happened, our environment and we were isolated from each other. And we always talk about we being one with the environment. And when this oneness got broken, the sense of well being was shaken. So we thought, how can we bring our environment into our classrooms? How can we start feeling one again with the environment, with the outside world? And one of the ways was to organize these virtual engagements with our heritage. Now, when I say heritage, I am not just restricting it to the places or people. Our intention was to include everything that can be part of our heritage. So, in first year, we always have this opportunity to take our first year students for heritage walks. So, we have been to so many places. Maybe in the end, Anshika ma'am can name a few places and we can just relive those moments in our memory. So, all these places have made us fond of our city. So, in this series, we had talks where we talked about the city, its heritage, its history. We've had talks where we talked why heritage is so important. And in this series, this is our third talk where we are going to understand how we can live heritage through walks. So I'm very, very excited to hear more on this. And without taking much time, I would just give the mic back to Anshika ma'am so that we can begin. Thank you, Anshika ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Avneet. Truly, these series have been one of the ways in which we have tried to relive our heritage walks and our whole engagement with heritage. So, without taking further time, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce the speaker for the day, Mr. Vikramjeet Singh Rooprai. Though he is known to many of us here, we had our heritage walks. We went to Mehrauli Archaeological Park and the other places with Sir. So, our engagement has been, it's been years ago, and continuously we have been in touch. So, welcome you, sir. And just a brief introduction, though it is not bound to my brief words. Mr. Vikramjeet is an educator, author, and a historian who left his 14-year-long IT career to turn into a teacher trainer and a heritage activist. He established Heritage Shala to set up heritage labs in schools where students are taught routine subjects through liberal arts and by using examples from history. He is a 5 times TEDx speaker and a consultant to many government and non government organizations. He is currently a visiting faculty at the National Institute of Fashion Technology and the North Cap University, and in the past, he has served as an auditor to UNESCO Aga Khan Trust for Culture and Education Quality Foundation of India. Sir, your passion for heritage, it's very, encouraging for each one of us here, and the love for heritage is visible by the fact that you left your 14 years career in the IT industry and you're there in this field and contributing a lot, and we are happy to have you, and we are sure that it will enrich each and everyone here. So thanks a lot for agreeing, and we welcome you again. Now I pass on the mic to Ms. Divya Sharma. and she'll take the session forward. Thank you, Sanjay.
Welcome once again, sir, for this session. I think without spending much time right now, the stage has already been set by Ms. Anshika and Dr. Ramneet Kaur. So, sir, I invite you for the talk, and roughly you will be having this 1 hour session with you, out of which for last 10-15 minutes we will be reserving for discussion and interaction with the participants also. Thank you, sir. You can begin now.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And for such kind words, Anshika ma'am, and thank you for inviting me. Um, One of my earliest walks was with Mata Sundari College when I started doing walks for educational institutes. So other than educational institutes, I was walking with other people, but with schools and colleges when I started. So Mata Sundari College has been one of the earliest ones with which I started working. So even I have fond memories and interesting memories associated with the institution. Mehrauli Archaeological Park has been one site where we have visited most. I think we've taken most of our batches to that one site. Reason being, there is so much to see, so much to explore over there. Now, when we were planning for today's session, and I realized that we have got 1 hour, and usually when there is a 1 hour session, we have to reserve 10 to 15 minutes for question answer and maybe 5 minutes for introduction or setting up. So effectively, we get 30 to 40 minutes. Monument that I wanted to discuss with you all was Qutub Minar or maybe Red Fort. But then I thought that if I try to get into the depth of that one structure, one monument, one complex, the way I do when we do our heritage walks, 40 minutes is not sufficient. So we need a better way with which I can also show you a monument and also give you something fruitful out of it. Because when we go to a place like Qutub Minar, there is so much to see and study. We can sit there, we can talk for about like 3 to 4 hours. Right now we have 40 minutes. So I am going to focus on the topic that we have, which is studying heritage through these walks. How do you study? So let's take Qutub Minar as an example, or maybe how about we do this? You can write in chat, or if you want to unmute, you can say, what all monuments have you seen in Delhi? Let's see. Fastest finger first. I've got chat open in front of me. So can I have students just type in and let me know what all monuments you have seen in Delhi? Qutub Minar is one. Okay, Gurleen has seen Qutub Minar. Lotus Temple, Red Fort. Okay. Now, interestingly, Lotus Temple is not considered as a monument, though it is a tourist attraction site. But officially, it's not a monument. When we say a monument, the building has to be more than 100 years old, and it has to be notified by one of the government agencies. If it is a national monument, it is Archaeological Survey of India. If it is a state protected monument, then there is Archaeological Board of that particular state. Or it could be a building which is in a private control. In that case, it is not officially a monument. It's just an old building. Similarly, our Parliament House, Rashtrapati Bhavan, they are not monuments as per the law, as per the constitution. But in loose terms, we often call them monuments. It's old building, tourist place, we just call them monuments. So there is a difference between the legal terminology and a casual tourism terminology. Okay, I can see so many places that you have visited. Again, all these places that you are writing here, Humayun's Tomb, India Gate, and all these are the most common sites which people often visit. So good that you have seen these. There's much more than that. Delhi has got more than 1,300 monuments, 1317 to be precise. Aditi just wrote Lodi Garden. When we say Lodi Garden was never Lodi Garden. It was originally a village called Khairpur. And inside that village, there were many monuments which still exist. So when Lady Willingdon transformed it to Willingdon Park, all those monuments were preserved other than one. There was a stepwell, a Bauli, which was buried. Rest of the monuments were kept intact. Lodi's tomb, Sayyid's tomb. There is a Atpula bridge. A couple of other Sheesh Gumbad, Bada Darwaza, the Bada Gumbad, which is actually a gate, the mosque, madrasa attached to it. So there are a lot of structures. So when you have to study a monument, please keep one thing in mind. When you visit the place, do not rush towards the main structure. Now, since many of you have written Red Fort, I will start Qutub, but I want to show you one thing about Red Fort before we get into that. Can I share my screen? Yes, I can. Just give me 1 second. I'll share my screen, and then I'll yeah. Okay. I hope you can see my screen, and there is the layout of Red Fort. I hope that's visible. Okay. Now, when you look at this whole thing, this is the map of Red Fort. Normally, when people come to this place, they enter from this public entry, which is of Lahori Gate. Lahore Darwaza se enter karke, they cross this Chhatta Bazaar. There is an enclosure, which is now this number 2. This is a small gate over here, which is called Naubat Khana. I mean, not that small; it is a big gate. Originally, this what is mentioned here as number 2 was not the Naubat Khana. Naubat Khana was this entire thing, the whole enclosure. And once you cross that, you get Diwane-Aam. So normally when people come, they enter from here, they cross this, they cross Naubat Khana, go to Diwane-Aam, then check out Diwane Khas, Rang Mahal, couple of other buildings over here, and they come out. So this is the area that normally tourists see. However, Red Fort is much bigger than that. And there is another fort behind Red Fort. This is called the Fort of Salimgarh, which was built more than 100 years before Red Fort was built. And then there are barracks on both sides, which are now converted to museums. There are 4 to 5 museums in there. There is a unique stepwell, which is 300 years older than Red Fort, which is, hey, where's my mouse? I should start marking. So that stepwell is over here. People don't visit that place. There are interesting structures in this area. People often avoid this area also. This whole area has been kept out of bounds for public. So nobody knows what exists here. Similarly, this is not just the case with Red Fort. There are many other buildings. Let me show you this one. What's so unique about this particular structure and why people don't know about it, even though when they visit Qutub Minar, what do they miss? Look at this. This is Sanderson's drawing of Qutub complex, and he's the one who converted it into a complex. So those who have been to Qutub Minar, they must remember this one tower, which is the Qutub Minar, the Quwwatul Islam Mosque. We have Khilji's tomb behind this. We have Iltutmish's tomb behind this. And maybe Alai Darwaza also. But Qutub Minar is much more than this. Let me show you. So this area that I am highlighting, this is the very first thing that was built. It was done by Qutbuddin Aibak.
The screen is not visible.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I'll just... Is it visible now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I was saying that this whole area where I'm shading yellow color is what Qutbuddin Aibak built. This is Quwwatul Islam Mosque. Qutub Minar was not done by Qutbuddin Aibak. He didn't even start it. And the most common narrative that we have, so if you become a teacher and you are in a classroom standing and talking to kids, and if you have to tell them that Qutub Minar was made by Qutbuddin Aibak because it is written in the book, the textbook that you are using to teach, well, then I can't help it. Maybe you have to play it around, because you can't just go against the textbook while you are in the classroom. However, there is a debate going on, and I have done my own research. Qutbuddin Aibak's name does not find mention in any old record. However, in our common history books, it is mentioned that Qutbuddin Aibak built Qutub Minar. But in old records, the original records of those times, Qutbuddin Aibak is not mentioned. So who did this mistake? Who mentioned Qutbuddin Aibak as the constructor is still a mystery to me. It does not find any mention before the British era. Now, when you look at these kind of illustrations, there are certain very peculiar elements that you need to notice. For example, here is a nice tank. This tank still exists. It's called Anangtal, but it is all filled up. It's in a very bad shape. These gates, these gates were never like these. So there used to be a fort near this, which is the oldest fort in Delhi. There are 12 forts in Delhi. The oldest one being Lal Kot, which is still there. However, Lal Kot was built in 10th century, and at that time we were not able to construct arches, this type of arch, which means this gate is not possible. In other words, when the artist in 1919 created this illustration, he just used his plain simple imagination, because by this time the fort wall was existing, but the gates were already gone. So he thought that maybe if there were gates, वो कुछ ऐसे से ही रहे होंगे. So he just created these gates, which was never the case. As a researcher, one needs to get into the depth of these kind of things. And whenever you are taking a group of students to any such site, make sure that you don't rush towards the main structure, look at it and come out. And another thing that I've seen with most of the schools that they are doing, I have seen this in few colleges also, unfortunately, they just form a very strict line. Everybody has to walk in a line. They'll enter from one side, take a circle, come out. I mean, that's something which would, I mean, you're just wasting your time and energy visiting that place, because that's not how you see a place, how you see a monument. You need to observe every corner. You need to challenge everything that you see over there. That's what walks are all about. So looking at this one, yeah, so just a second. This is Quwwatul Islam, which is now called Quwwatul Islam, originally called Jama Masjid. This portion was done by Qutbuddin Aibak. Then came his son-in-law Iltutmish, who did this outer portion and these 3 levels of Qutub Minar. So this was done by Iltutmish. This corridor was done by Iltutmish, and he built his own tomb behind this. He's buried over here. Then came Alauddin Khilji. So Alauddin Khilji did some more additions. These gates were added by Khilji. This wall was added by Khilji. This portion, and he also added his own madrasa and tomb behind this. So this is Alauddin Khilji's work. He also started another tower over here, which has got double the diameter of Qutub Minar. So this tower was supposed to be double the height of Qutub Minar. However, he died while this tower, not even the first story was complete. So what I've shaded right now, only this much is complete. And nobody after Khilji bothered to complete it. So Alai Minar, as it is called, was only complete up till this level and not beyond this. What you see in the illustration is just artist imagination, because Sanderson thought that maybe he built it and now it is broken. After that came Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Firoz Shah Tughlaq built this portion. So this is all Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Then came the Mughals. Mughals added a structure over here. This whole block is by Mughals. It is also part of Qutub complex. Then came the British. The British added structures over here. They are also existing right now. Exhibition is going on. So this has been converted to a museum, and there are some other structures related to the British. British also added a lot of other structures in this area. Metcalfe, to be more precise. So there are multiple layers of history when you visit this place. And if you want to study this properly, you have to study it in those layers only, because then you will be able to see all those differences when you move from one stone to another, one period to another, how the stone changes, how the carving changes, and most importantly, how those symbols and motifs change. So if I do a proper Qutub Minar workshop right now, it will take 2 to 3 hours. So I'm not going to run through the entire thing. However, there are certain important elements that as a teacher you should learn. You should understand the concept that how to study those elements. So let's focus on those. A quick view of Qutub Minar. This is 3D drawing of how of the stage it was complete. In that, these ones, these gates are all gone now. They don't exist. You see these 2 gates over here. These gates are there. This is the Mughal complex, the Caravanserai with a mosque and a garden. This gate right now in the bottom right corner is currently used as the entry, ticket checking point. So when you enter Qutub complex, this is where you show your ticket or your token. And then this dotted line is the trail that you take. You just enter, because this gate is not there anymore. You just cross this place, and even this wall does not exist. The inner gate exists. Let me show you some pictures to be more clear. One is this Ghulam Ali's painting from 1852, which shows that it was in a bad shape and British repaired it further. This is the aerial view. I'll skip this one. I want to show you something more important. So this is, of course, the gate of the Mughal era. Now, when you look at this gate, look at the design elements. These are small things that you need to observe. The metal part was added later, obviously, so that they can close this thing. On the other side, we have the gate, which is still original. This is the other gate on the back side. And this is the Caravanserai. So these used to be the rooms where people would come and stay. And this was outside, just outside the enclosure of Alauddin Khilji. So when people going to Mehrauli, coming to Mehrauli, they can halt over here. This was just outside the village or the town at that time. And Delhi is not just one city. Delhi is multiple cities. So this, being the oldest city, had maximum footfall and had seen a lot of activity. So these kind of structures were actually important around this place. The mosque, when you look at the mosque, there is a very small, humble entry gate, and this pink layer means that it was restored somewhere in last 30 to 40 years. Door, however, appears to be older. So this is probably the original Mughal era gate, and rest was restored because this is all cement. Inside, dome has these nice design elements on top, and this part is more important. This one flower. This flower is seen on every Awadh building. When I say Awadh, it is a region governed from Lucknow. And at one point of time, Nawab of Awadh used to rule from Calcutta also, Wajid Ali Shah. So this entire area was under Awadh. So the architecture was quite common across this area. Awadh was so powerful that the Nawab of Awadh would become de facto prime minister of the Mughal court. So the architectural elements that we had in eastern UP also came into Delhi's architecture or the Mughal architecture. One of them being Tesu ka Phul, Tesu flower at the center of the arch, and these panels on top. So these panels would have some message written on them. In most cases, it would be simply some verse of Quran or maybe name of God. However, during Mughal era, even before Mughal era, they would use at least one panel to write about the structure, who made it, when was it made, maybe the expense. On all other structures that we have within Qutub complex, this type of plaque is seen. In this particular case, it was written with paint. So all that is gone, and we don't know what message was written on this. In other cases, it was written, it was carved out in stone, so we still have those messages left. These minarets are also important to study. Now, we often stereotype that if it is a tomb or if it is a mosque has to have minaret. That's not the case. You look at any mosque across the globe, there are very few cases or very few countries where they have actually used minarets. In most of the other cases, minarets do not exist. Even in the holiest of all, the mosques of Makkah and Medina, minarets were added very recently, comparatively. And looking at this minaret, this is just symbolic, because the idea behind minaret is that the muezzin, or the person who will call everyone for prayer, would climb up the minaret and give azan, call the faithful to the prayer. In this case, he can't even stand. It's a very small, tiny minaret. All you can do is place a small speaker maybe in here, a very tiny one. So this is just a symbolic architectural element which existed, and it was made popular by the Mughals. Before Mughals, we don't see minarets. And while I'm talking about all these, Mughals and Khiljis and Tughlaqs, it's also important to understand the timeline, that who were these people, when did they come, So I'm going to show you my website. Can you see my website, Monuments of Delhi? Or are you still seeing the presentation? Can anyone help me with that?
Only presentation.
Okay, I'll just I'll reshare my screen.
Yes.
Okay, this is my website, monumentsofdelhi.com. You go to the ruler section, you get to see the people who have ruled over Delhi. We start with the Tomars, coming from 736, go all the way up to Anangpal Tomar, Anangpal III, 1180, when his grandson Prithviraj Chauhan takes over, and then Muhammad Ghori comes in, and then starts the slave dynasty in 1206. So Muhammad Ghori, while he's alive, Qutbuddin Aibak is not called the Sultan of Delhi. He's only called the governor of Ghori. And then Aibak's son Aram Shah, and then his son-in-law Iltutmish takes over. Iltutmish's son Ruknuddin Firoz is here for 3 months before Ruknuddin Firoz's sister Razia Uddin Sultana, or Razia Sultan, takes over. And this goes on for 90 years. When Khilji comes in, Khiljis go up till 1321 when Tughlaqs come in. After Tughlaqs, when Nasiruddin Mahmud Shah dies, he is killed by Taimur. And after Taimur's attack on Delhi, for 16 years, nobody is ruling over Delhi. And that's when Daulat Khan Lodhi comes in. But within 2 months, Sayyid removes him and declares himself as the governor of Taimur Khan. So even Taimur has gone for 16 years. Sayyid Khizr Khan was so scared of Taimur that he did not call himself the emperor of Delhi. He just said that I am the governor of Taimur. He didn't even ask Taimur whether I can be your governor or not. He declared himself, and he used Taimur's flag, and he started sending money to him. But his rule was short-lived. The dynasty continued. Lodhis came back. Then came the Mughals. So Mughals come in 1526 with Babur. That's when Ibrahim Lodhi's general Daulat Khan invites them. Up till here, it is Sultanate, Delhi Sultanate period. So when I say Mughal, the period starts from 1526, and when I say Sultanate, it starts from Muhammad Ghori's 1192 invasion. So there is a long gap of 300-400 years. This is one thing that everybody should keep in mind while we are looking at history. You don't have to remember dates precisely, but just a rough idea, because that helps. Going back to my presentation. The gate. This is there is another interesting element that we see at Qutub Minar. There is this nice grave platform which is built in Bengali style. It's called Bangla Shala. This roof style is called Bangla Shala. Now, what is a Bengali roof doing in a in this complex of slave dynasty? So these, we don't know who built it. We don't know when was it built. There has been no carbon dating or anything of that sort. There are no records pertaining to this particular structure. Probably some noble or some traveler coming from that region built it, or maybe the guy belonged to this place, but he was in Bengal. He saw the architecture, he liked it. He came back and he got something done in the same design. It's a mystery. And these kind of elements, there are many such elements that we can see here, and we can talk about them. Now let's talk about the mosque. Again, there is an inscription on which Qutbuddin Aibak, when he got this mosque constructed, he wrote that I, Qutbuddin Aibak, am constructing this mosque, which I have built from the material of 27 idol temples. 27 बुत खानों का मटेरियल को इस्तेमाल करके 12,000 दिल्ली वाल खर्च करके, so 12,000 दिल्ली वाल्स were spent, and this mosque was खुदा की इबादत का तामीर करवा रहा हूं. So this mosque was established. Now there has been a debate, and very recently someone has also filed a PIL in this High Court of Delhi, that since this mosque was constructed with 27 temples, why shouldn't we restore those temples, and why shouldn't we start worshipping once again? Interesting point. How about I just talk about certain elements when you enter this mosque, what you should look for to answer this particular debate. This is the enclosure of that mosque, which has an iron pillar. People often mistakenly call it as Ashoka's pillar. This is not Ashokan pillar. This iron pillar was manufactured about 800 years after Ashok. So Ashoka used buffed sandstone. So we have got all those shiny sandstone pillars that Ashoka has. This is made of Wootz steel, and it comes from Vidisha, Madhya Pradesh, where Samrat Vikramaditya was ruling at that time. And why we say that it can never get rusted, though we do see traces of rust on it now after such a long time. It has been 1500 years. It has got a coating of phosphorus on it. Phosphorus prevents oxygen to react with iron, which is ferrous. So no formation of ferrous oxide, hence no rusting. As simple as that. These kind of scientific aspects you will see everywhere, be it this star, be it this particular arch which was built before we had the concept of true arch. Look at this pillar, the way the crowning is done, the inverted lotus and the capital. So there used to be a Garud on top of this. We don't know where that Garud is, whether it was left in Vidisha when they brought pillar over here to Delhi. And the pillar has so many stories. Although I want to focus on architectural elements and elements of study, but I'll just touch upon this study, this one story, because it's quite interesting. When Anangpal Tomar, the first king, came to Delhi, he found this pillar over here. Because Delhi is not established by Anangpal, Delhi existed much before that. We have Jain Patavlis which talk about Mihirapuri, which is this area. We have Varamihir's records where he established an observatory over here, wrote 5 books, the Panch Siddhantika, out of which one book is Surya Siddhant, the first book, where he says that if you have a tall pillar and on summer equinox or winter equinox, light of sun falls on this pillar and you measure the length of the shadow that is casted and you know the height of the pillar using these formulas, and he gave the formula in there. Using these formulas, you can calculate the circumference of Earth. And then he also gives accurate value of pi up to 4 decimal places. He gives us the formula of pi r square 2 pi r. So you calculate equator diameter of Earth, and you multiply. You through this you can also get circumference of Sun and diameter of Sun. You multiply diameter of Sun with 108, you get distance between Earth and Sun. You multiply diameter of Earth with 108, you get distance between Earth and Moon. So that element of 108 or the holy number of 108 is very in detail described in Surya Siddhant, the first book that he wrote over here. And this pillar also comes from the same town where Varamihir was earlier working as the minister in Vikramaditya's court, Vidisha. So probably it came along with him in 6th century or 5th century itself. Varamihir was also a student of Aryabhat. Aryabhat never gave us the properties of zero. Aryabhat only used the concept of Shunya, which was a Buddhist spiritual concept. Shunyata in Buddhism means a spiritual realm deep inside you where you have nothing till infinity. You go deep inside that dark space and there's absolutely nothing. That's called Shunyata. आप अपने भीतर शून्यता में स्थित हो जाए तो आप निर्वाण को प्राप्त कर सकते हैं. Now, when Aryabhat was developing his fraction system, he wanted to put something, because after putting a decimal, he wanted to leave some spaces. What would come at those places? Nothing. Nothing means shunyata. Nothing is null, void, infinite till infinity. So he used a dot, or which became a symbol of zero. He only used zero in mathematics. While developing his fraction system, he never gave us the concept of zero or the mathematical properties of zero. That is something that Bhaskaracharya, the first, the second, and more importantly, Varamihir did, who copied his entire work, the Aryabhatis, and also corrected his sign tables, rewrote a lot of things that Aryabhat had written, corrected several mistakes, and that's how we know Aryabhat, and we don't remember Varamihir these days. Anyways, all those things are associated. So while you are at this place, how can you facilitate teaching, no matter what subject you are teaching? If you are teaching physics, then light, shadow, distance, all these things, you can do calculations. Government of India also has a program known as Paridhi project, where they use Qutub Minar and Iron Pillar and Jantar Mantar, places like these, to calculate distance between Earth and Sun using sunlight, using those formulas given in Surya Siddhant and Bhratika Siddhant and other books, Bhrat Samhita. All these books are available on Amazon if you want to buy. So that is there. If you are teaching chemistry, you can simply talk about the chemical compositions that are there in this pillar. And right now I'm just focusing on one pillar. The moment I move to the arch behind that pillar, I have all these things coming back again. And again, we can start this kind of discussion. My point here being that no matter what subject you are teaching, every single element around you can help you teach. You know why? Because while these things were happening, they were not part of history. At that time, it was current affairs, maybe politics, maybe science of some form. For example, Chandrayaan. I hope you all remember Chandrayaan. A while back, we launched this Chandrayaan, the mission on Moon, and we also launched the Mangalyaan. These missions were amazing, cheapest in the world, yet efficient. After a few years, some history teacher will be teaching about these in history books, but that history teacher will have no idea that what kind of rocket fuel does rocket use, whether it is propane, butane, or maybe just kerosene. What is projectiles, how the trajectory is calculated. So shouldn't this topic be taught by a physics teacher? If so, then isn't everything that we are teaching in our school is actually history? I mean, Newton dead, Einstein dead, Pythagoras dead. So basically, whatever subject you are teaching, you're just teaching history. So how about we chuck off the formal subject of history, bring a little bit of history in every subject and make everything interesting? We bring in stories like this. So if I have to talk to a kid and I have to teach him right angle triangle and everything, maybe I can just ask him to measure the height of the pillar, length of the shadow, and then look at the angle. It's precise 90 degree. I know what, I can put all my formulas, I can do my calculations, I can teach him math through these instead of using divider and scale, just to make things interesting. So once in a while, these elements can be used. The top of the pillar. Now let's move to the mosque, where we have all those temple pillars. One most important thing that you need to study when you are in this complex, you need to observe is, look at how the stone has, the edges are softened. Edges are not sharp, they are soft. So probably this piece of stone is much older than a few other pieces that we have. Look at this one. This is still crisp, sharp, and this one is not that sharp. And these two stones are from different places, so the material is slightly different. Again, with this one, this particular image of Bhutnath, you will see at many places. There is one circle in the center. This image originates during Buddha's time, when we have the iconography of Buddha. So in case of Bodhisattva, there are 32 qualities of Bodhisattva, in which one of the quality is that there is light radiating from the urna, or between the eyebrows. And that imagery came into many other structures, many other statues that we made. And this particular element also finds mention in one of our Hindu texts, where it takes in future the form of Tisri Aankh or Trinetra of Lord Shiva. So that image, since Bhutnath is associated with Shiva, this imagery is found at many places within this complex and many other complexes across South Asia. The oldest temples that we have over here, from which the material was brought, they are plain and simple. However, at the same time, we also have structures where we have very interestingly decorative elements. Roof, pillar bases. This is one of the kalash, which denotes the kumbh that came out of Samudra Manthan. This particular thing denotes that. Now let me show you this block, When you go to Qutub complex, this is one area which is off bounds. People can't access this area. This has been the ladies' mosque. There are stairs over here. It is kept locked because a very small entry exit, and given the kind of footfall that this monument gets, people cannot be allowed into this area, and that is why everything inside this area is still preserved in its original state. Which means when Qutbuddin Aibak built this entire thing, he did not break those structures. He did use the pillars from those temples, but he did not break any statue. Those statues are still there. Where you see statues or other elements broken are the places where anyone who's visiting this place can touch while standing on ground. So over a period of 700 or 600 years, the tourists who have been visiting this place, they actually destroyed a large portion of it. This is the inside of ladies section. You see the roof is still, the ceiling is still in its original shape. Here we have all the apsaras and Kalp Vriksha, and on the side also we have some panels depicted. Look at this one. This top panel comes from a different place and the bottom panel comes from a different place. So now there must have been so many different temples, like 27 temples we know. But these temples were not all Hindu temples. They were mostly Jain temples and a few Hindu temples. And Jains had already left this place when Anangpal Tomar came in. Jain Patavalis date back to 3rd or 4th century, or 5th century, which means Jains were here in 5th century, Tomars come in 8th century, and Qutbuddin Aibak comes in 12th century. So there is a gap of 700 years since the first temple was built. And during these 700 years, those people who had populated these Jain temples were already gone. So probably those temples were not in a very good shape, but the building or the structure was still there. Maybe they were not being used. Those temples, along with the Hindu temples that were here, the material was all brought to this place. Then these were spread across the area. Material was brought to this place and installed in this one complex. So you see this particular stone, the stone we have below this, all these three are different material from different time period, and you can tell that by the sharpness of the edge, and of course by looking at the material also. Look at the Kirti Mukhas. Kirti Mukha is associated with Jalandhar Rakshas. So there is a story that Jalandhar sent Rahu to hide moon so that there will be no light at night, and he could capture Parvati and bring it to Jalandhar. But Lord Shiva got very angry, and Lord Shiva opened his third eye, and there was a flame that came out which produced a lion. Now Rahu got scared and Rahu begged for mercy. So Lord Shiva said, okay, that's fine. He forgave him. But now what to do with that lion? So then Shiva said that this lion is hungry and he would eat everything that is there. How about this lion starts eating itself? So he said, okay, to the lion that now you have to eat yourself. And the lion started eating itself from tail until only the face was left. And then Lord Shiva was very happy and he said, okay, you don't have to eat yourself further. Your face will now be my guard, and wherever my temple will be constructed, you will be at the gate. So wherever you see Shiva temple, outside that you see a Kirti Mukh. That's the story in Hinduism. Interestingly, we have similar story in Jainism, we have similar story in Buddhism, we have these kind of stories in Chinese tradition, we have such story in Indonesian tradition, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and everywhere it relates to the local culture, everywhere story. Even in Greek culture, we have one such creature. In that case, it is a snake and not a lion, which is eating itself. It's a circle, it's a vicious circle. In Chinese, it is known as the greedy monster. The monster who is so greedy that it starts eating itself. And depiction in most of the cases is somewhat similar, but the name and the stories differ. The depiction remains same. So in Hinduism, we associated it with Jalandhar Rakshas and Lord Shiva, but we find it in all other cultures. So you will find this imagery in Buddhist stupas as well as Jain temples. And this kind of image, which now becomes the Nazar Battu that we have at our home, comes from old Jain temples and later was used in some Hindu temples also. same Kirti Mukh that I was talking about. This chain represents the tail that it was eating, and when it is constructed in temples, it is made in form of a chain. And then we have that Kalash, out of which this is the Amrit Kalash, the Jalandhar Rakshas, and Kalp Vriksh that we have, which came out of Samundar Manthan. Now, if you look at these pillars carefully, you'll see that in this case, we have the Kirti Mukh pillar base and then the Kalash. And there is one Kalash on top of this also. In the next pillar, we have Kirti Mukh, the chain, and the Kalash, a blank panel, and then something else. Because these pillars were not one straight pillar, they were small, small pieces. And when they were rearranged to make a mosque, they did not bother which piece goes with which one. They just started placing it. So in some case, you will find Kirti Mukh right at the base. Somewhere you will find Kirti Mukh at the top, at the crown. Somewhere Kalash is at the crown. In some case, you will find 5 Kalash in one pillar. So they were all randomly arranged, which means they had material stored at one place. From there, whatever they could pull in, place wherever they could, they just placed it. We have torans very finely carved, and these kind of elements, you see these apsaras on the corner. So whenever you go to a site, these are small, small elements that one must observe, sit there, study in detail. Okay, here's the thing. I am running short of time, so I'll not be able to complete everything that is associated with Qutub Minar. But one more important aspect that I would like to talk to you about is, in Islam, it is haram, it is forbidden to create a picture or a statue of a human being, animal, and in many cases even plants. Reason being, this extreme thought comes from this one ideology that all these natural elements have been created by God. And if you try to recreate them in form of a painting or even a photograph, you are trying to imitate God. And that's not allowed. You cannot imitate God. And that is why it is said that you are not allowed to make pictures of prophets or anyone in Islam. Even photography is prohibited. However, that is a radical thought. If you look at Qutub Minar and if you look at any monument in India, if you go to Fatehpur Sikri and by any chance, it is with permission only, you get to access the old prayer room of Akbar. In old prayer room of Akbar, he had 3 paintings on the backside wall, not towards the not the facing wall where he would pray, not towards the Qibla, but on the back wall he had 3 paintings of Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Jesus, and Prophet Moses. Because Moses, Jesus, Abraham, they are also prophets in Islam, as mentioned in Quran. And looking at these kind of structures, the Qutub and Red Fort and Humayun's tomb and Taj Mahal, one can easily say that this whole idea of not using floral elements or animals while constructing something was not there when these buildings were made, because even the verses of Quran are written with floral patterns. At many places, the dots, when you look at the main Qutub Minar, the dots or the nuktas are actually flowers. And all these malas and everything, they exist. When ayats of Quran were written on this wall, Kalp Vriksh was added to it, which is integral part of Jain cosmology or Jain tradition. And later it is, it finds its mention in Hindu tradition also when we started making our own temples. Though I don't know if there is any Jain temple which is without a Kalp Vriksh, where they have carving and they don't make this one. So here when they wrote the verses of Quran, then I also had a debate with someone. He said, no, the Kalp Vriksh was already there, or this Hindu symbol was already there. The verse of Quran was added later. Well, if you look at this stone, you can very clearly see that this black piece is from a different place and this white piece is from a different place. So all these stones from different buildings were brought to this place, stacked on one another, and then carving was done, because this whole carving is at same level. So this was added when the ayat of Quran was being written. And this particular stone has all washed off. This one is still in its good condition. This shows that the material is quite different and comes from a different place. So these kind of small elements are there which you must study when you are visiting such a place. We should talk about these. I'll show you a couple of things on Qutub Minar also. For example, this is the entry gate where we have this panel written by Emperor Lodhi when he repaired Qutub Minar. You see this impression over here. There used to be something on this, on both sides, but it's gone. What was it? We don't know. Probably some sort of symbol, some element that was there, which is now gone. On the band that we have and on the balconies, one is this railing or the parapet. This was added by the British, and that is why, again, the stone is different, the pattern on it is different. Under these balconies, the detailing of the work that you see, it's amazing. Look at the fine work that they have done, and that too at such a height. So every level has this kind of work done. And you see these holes. There are holes everywhere in the star. Once you are inside, there is no spot during any time of day which is dark. So andar na suffocation hogi na andhera hoga. It's designed in such a way. The dots are the nuktas. So this is ta, and we have these two dots are actually flowers. This was done by the British. It used to be on top of Qutub Minar at one point of time, but it was removed because Lord Curzon thought that architecture does not match. This appears to be of a Bengali style. So he said, take it off. Sanderson sundial and Alai Darwaza. I want to talk about Alai Darwaza before I end this session. Alai Darwaza has got elements blended in from so many different architectural and cultural styles. Starting with this one element, so this is just a floral pattern, but we often see this kind of image in French architecture, the Tudor architecture. These symbols are seen on almost all Buddhist stupas. So these elements come from there. We don't know whether the architect who designed this actually got inspired by visiting a stupa, or he just had this thing in his mind and he made it, or he saw somewhere and he just did it. So we don't know. But yes, it exists over here. This garland, which is the entry gate, which is an integral part of a temple. We always make our gates with garland. So when Khilji came, all the temple material was gone. So they did everything from scratch. But they adapted those elements and they added here. Look at these flowers, floral petals. And this Buddhist knot, it is called the infinity knot. This is a Buddhist knot. Then we have a garland of roses. This star, which is often considered to be the Star of David, it's there on the flag of Israel also. This star exists on almost every mosque in India. So if it is Star of David and a religious symbol of Jews, and Muslims and Jews have a fight going on, we know from Palestine and Israel, then why is this star on all the Muslim monuments? It should be in the, it has to be on the Jewish structures. Why is it on the Muslim monuments? Even that, even leave that. Those of you who have your Janam Patris made, horoscopes made, have a look at it. अभी क्लास के बाद अगर मौका मिले एक बार उठा के देखना अपनी जन्म पत्री. पहले पेज पे यही स्टार बना होगा. हम सबकी जन्म कुंडली पे यही स्टार बना हुआ है. If this star is part of Hindu culture, then what is it doing on a mosque? Forget that. What is it doing on the flag of Israel? Perhaps we don't understand our symbols that way. We just put those direction thing that horses put. एक तरफ ही देखना है, उसके beyond ना हमें कुछ सोचना है. We create our own stereotypes and start living with it. And not just living with it, we start preaching it. That's where the problem starts. So once you are at a monument, any structure, you're doing a historic walk, the first thing that you need to do is your own research. And when you're doing your own research, you need to keep an open mind. You need to think beyond what you already know or what preconceived notion you have. You have to look at these structures, that all these floral patterns, all these symbols, the knots, how many cultures actually use them? Why do they exist over here? This sunrise kind of symbol actually is associated with Kalpvriksha in South India. How does it reach North Indian Alai Darwaza with a garland of roses? So that's Alai Darwaza. I've already used most of my time. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. And maybe we can have some session some other time, and I can continue this discussion or whatever is left of it.
Sure, sir. In fact, our students are very keen to go to that real natural heritage walk rather than this virtual one.
Sure, I
So,
would love to take them.
exactly. So we are also just waiting for that to happen. Students, some of you have already put some kind of comments, some kind of questions or queries that boggle your mind. You can now put them forward. You can unmute and ask the question directly to the sir. If you want me to read from the chat, I can also do so. Put up there itself.
Good morning, good evening, sir. My
Good
name
evening.
is Radhika. Sir, this session was so interesting,
Thank you.
I must say. And I had to say this and ask you this. I once saw a show on TV and they talked about this temple in India. It's in Tanjore and it's called Brihadeshwara Temple. And they talked about that heavy stone, and they told that in such an old time, how did those people manage to put such a heavy stone on top of it? Like, what technology did they use? And it's unexplainable by the scientists.
Yeah. Brideshwara temples, finial is often discussed about that, and we in Delhi also we have something like that. So I was reading some old British records in archives, and I found out this one document which said that in Tughlakabad, people from far off villages and far off towns are visiting Tughlakabad just to see one single stone which is 16 feet long, and people could not believe that someone can query a 16 feet long stone block and bring it and place it here when we do not have any quarry near Tughlakabad fort. So from several kilometers away, it was brought here, and there is a very small village that officer writes in 1800 something, that a small village of people, a small group of people have started living inside Tughlakabad because they are earning money from all these tourists who are coming to see that one stone. So we have those cases, and yes, it is quite interesting to study how these stones were quarried and moved and placed at such high points.
Somebody else also.
Radhika, do you have a follow-up question? I can see a hand raised.
Sir, the architecture in Ajanta and Ellora caves, sir, the Kailasha temple there in Ellora caves, sir, its architecture is so amazing.
Yes, and again, when you talk about that, this is what we often miss. Ajanta and Ellora are far apart from each other. I don't know why we combine them, probably because of the timeline that they share. Ajanta is cave paintings, Ellora is rock cut temples, not one temple. Kailasha temple being just one of them, rather the largest of them. There are few other temples within that sequence, all rock cut temples, with Kailash temple being the largest one. And if you are conducting a heritage walk, what you need to do is you need to study the surrounding smaller elements along with the main structure. That adds to it.
Very good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Jasleen.
Sir, I wanted you to tell us or name a book which beginners like me can start reading, because I'm a person who has not any interest until now in history.
Well, you need to tell me which aspect of history you want to study. If you want to just look into the general stuff, there are a couple of books that I would recommend. One being Delhi by Heart by Raza Rumi. I'll type it here in the message. This is a brief history of Delhi written by a Pakistani traveler who was here just for 1 year. In 1 year, whatever he saw in Delhi, because he was not allowed to go outside Delhi, he was on a mission appointed by UNESCO, I think International Monetary Fund, IMF. Being a Pakistani, he was not allowed to go outside Delhi, so he saw Delhi extensively, and he wrote a beautiful book on it. But this is one you can read. Another one you can read is, it should be here somewhere. Yeah, that's my book. It's on Stepwells of Delhi, Baulis of Delhi, Delhi Heritage, top 10 Baulis, in case you're interested in water structures, how water was there, what is the science behind water management in ancient times and medieval times. So I've spent 5 years doing my research on just the 12. There are 33 step wells in Delhi. I have written a book on 12, though the name says Delhi Heritage Top 10 Baulis. So you can have a look at this book, and it will give you a lot of information. Maybe start with this.
Thank you, sir. That's all, and we can't wait to have real visits with you. Thank you so much.
Definitely.
Excuse me, sir.
Anji Nikita.
Good afternoon, sir.
Mhm.
Sir, actually, I want to ask that people say that most of the forts are haunted. Are they really so? Because, like, I'm from Rajasthan, and the Bhangad Fort is said to be the haunted fort. So, are they really haunted, and how?
So here's the thing, Nikita. I was sitting with this officer of ASI inside Red Fort, and we were having a cup of tea when this topic of Bhangad came in, because वहां पर हो ही रहा था कि लाल किले में रात के 6-7 बज गए, 7-8 बज गए थे, अंधेरा हो गया था. एंड आई सेड कि सर अब निकलता हूं मैं यहाँ से, अंदर काफी अंधेरा हो चुका है और मतलब मुझे यहाँ से बाहर निकलने में भी दिक्कत होगी. So he said कोई बात नहीं, there used to be a college inside Red Fort. इस ASI वालों का अपना एक इंस्टीट्यूट होता था. So I was sitting in that. So मैंने कहा यार ये ऐसे लग रहा है कोई haunted place में आ गया हूँ. Then he said, okay, let me tell you the story. He said, भानगढ़ का नाम सुना है? मैंने कहा हाँ जी बिल्कुल सुना है. कहते there used to be time जब भानगढ़ के आसपास भी कोई आता नहीं था, 30-40 years back. And I was given the charge of restoring भानगढ़. So I went there. दूर दूर तक कुछ खाने पीने को नहीं, रहने को कोई जगह नहीं, तो भानगढ़ के अंदर ही हम चादर बिछा के लेट जाते थे, वहीं रह लेते थे और रिस्टोरेशन करते रहते थे. हफ्ते में एक बार शहर के पास आ जाते थे अपना सप्लाईज के लिए या कुछ काम के लिए. Then someone opened a hotel near that place, and then देखते देखते another hotel came up, and we were surprised कि होटल यहाँ चलेंगे कैसे. This was a time when village tourism was also being promoted by इंदिरा गांधी जी. नया कॉन्सेप्ट उन्होंने शुरू किया था, तो उसके तहत होटल तो बन गए, लेकिन ये चलेंगे कैसे. फिर कहते हमारे देखते देखते क्या हुआ, एक दिन 2-3 होटल बन चुके थे, इन्होंने कॉन्फ्रेंस बुलाई. इन्होंने राजस्थान, हरियाणा, दिल्ली से कुछ प्रेस रिपोर्टर्स को बुलाया, उनको बिठाया, खिलाया पिलाया पूरा दिन, और जैसे ही शाम हुई इन्होंने दरवाजे बंद कर दिए होटलों के, दरवाजे खिड़कियां सब कुछ, और उन लोगों को बोला कि आप कोई खिड़की नहीं खोलेंगे. ये पुराना टाइम है, एयर कंडीशनर अभी इन्वेंट नहीं हुए हैं, विच मीन्स सब ओपन होने वाली विंडोज हैं. बट इनको बोला गया कि रात के टाइम कोई विंडो नहीं ओपन करेगा, क्योंकि यहाँ पर ना भानगढ़ में कोई भूत रहता है, वो आ जाता है, वो दरवाजे खिड़कियां खटखटाता है, तो आप किसी भी फ्लोर पे आप विंडो नहीं ओपन कर सकते. और उसके बाद सारा स्टाफ वहां पर बैठ के स्टाफ ने रात भर स्टोरियां सुनाई थी, हमारे साथ ऐसे हुआ, हमारे साथ ऐसे हुआ. अगले दिन इनको भानगढ़ घुमाने के लिए लाया गया और बताया गया ये वो पेड़ है जिस पर वो सारे भूत रहते हैं. एंड मिस्टर शर्मा हु वाज टेलिंग मी दिस स्टोरी, ही सेड आई वाज सो पिस्ड ऑफ, क्योंकि उस पेड़ के नीचे मैं सोता था. सो ही सेड मैं हूं भानगढ़ का भूत. और उस दिन के बाद कह रहे हम हैरान थे कि जैसे ही अगले हफ्ते से अखबारों में छपना शुरू हुआ कि भानगढ़ में भूत है, भानगढ़ में भूत है, पब्लिक आनी शुरू हो गई, वो होटल चलने लग गए. सो दिस इज हाउ हॉन्टेड प्लेसेस आर क्रिएटेड. आपको ब्लॉग्स में, वेबसाइट्स पे हॉन्टेड वाला फैक्टर, हॉन्टेड के नाम से आर्टिकल्स मिलेंगे. आई हैव बीन टू ऑल दीज प्लेसेस सो मेनी टाइम्स. मुझे तो आज तक कोई मिला नहीं है कोई भूत वगैरह. मैं तो कई बार रिकॉर्डर लेके गया हूँ कि इंटरव्यू ले लूं किसी का, एक भी सामने नहीं आता मेरे, या पता नहीं मेरी शक्ल ऐसी है, मेरे से डर जाते हैं वो लोग. So it's all in here. How you perceive.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, actually, people create them haunted.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, is there any more question from students?
Divya, can I just ask?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Enjoyed, and Mr. Ruparai, I want to congratulate you for invoking so much interest in students who actually don't have history as a subject.
Thank you.
I belong to the history department, and I want to congratulate you, and your passion for heritage really comes out. And
Thank you.
Sir,
Yeah.
I have good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the insightful session. I would like to ask that at
I
some.
think Shabnam ma'am was saying something. She can
Oh, I'm
continue.
so sorry. I'm so
That's fine.
sorry.
Shabna ma'am, actually you're not very audible.
Continue.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, we could not hear you properly.
Hello?
Ma'am, can you be a little louder?
Or maybe you can type your question if you audio
Yes.
is not working.
Is it all right now? Can you
Yeah,
hear
now
me?
it's fine.
I just, Mr. Ruparai, wanted to congratulate you for invoking so much interest
Thank you, ma'am.
in students, in our BLED students who actually don't have history as a subject. And you've really invoked passion, and I want to thank you for it and your own passion for heritage. I've read your book on the Bawalis, and what I really liked was your focus on the iconography at the Qutb complex and how you actually subtly brought out so many things, the amalgamation of cultures and so on. Thank you. And thank you, BLED department, Ramneet, all of you for bringing us wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabnam ma'am. Your words are really inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah, Arshmin, I think we will take your question in the last. Others may put in the chat box if you are really keen to ask something. Ashwin, do you have a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, please
Please
go
go.
ahead.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, ma'am. I really didn't mean to. I didn't know that she
Yes,
was
me, don't
speaking.
even we couldn't hear, ma'am. It's fine. You continue.
Yeah. So actually, at some places, I've seen a sun with a face inscribed in it. So, and it's not like it is at a particular places like Muslim, the forts and all made by Muslims and all. I've seen at many places. So, what does that really mean? And I know it has some significance, but I really don't know what it is.
Sun is part. So in entire world is divided into two parts. One is sun, one is moon. So half of the world or all the warrior clans in the world, they follow sun. Half of the warrior clans follow moon. In India, in the Vedic tradition, we call them Suryavanshi and Chandravanshi. And there are other traditions where we have different names. So everyone has different depiction of sun. For example, even the Mughals associated themselves with sun, and that is why the Mughal flag is say Shero Khurshid. Khurshid is the Persian word for sun. So there is a lion, and behind the lion there is a rising sun. That's the Mughal flag, Shero Khurshid. So you will find depiction of sun at many places, not just any particular religion. Almost every religion, it will be either sun or moon, and in many cases they will draw faces on it, and in other cases it will just be rays coming out of it. But yes, sun is used. And also when you pick up any of the Vedic tradition, when you start studying, you'll see it starts from Surya. ऋग्वेद में जो पहला चैप्टर है वो सूर्य पे है, और सबसे ज्यादा काम सूर्य के साथ एसोसिएटेड हमारे जो शास्त्र हैं उनमें सूर्य पर बहुत काम किया गया है, उसको बहुत इंपॉर्टेंस दी गई है. ऑब्वियसली इट विल गेट डिपिक्टेड. जब कुषाण एरा में सबसे पहले मूर्तियां बननी शुरू हुई, पहली मूर्ति विष्णु और सूर्य की बनाई गई थी. सायन आचार्य 2nd century BC, when he is writing commentary on Rigved, he described sun in such a detail. He said तथात् समर्यते योजनानं सहस्त्रम द्वे द्वे शते द्वे एकेन निमिषा अर्धेन नमस्तुते इति. I've just given you accurate speed of light as he gave us in 2nd century BC. तथा समर्यते, स्मरण रखिएगा, योजनानम सहस्त्रम 1000 योजन, योजनानम सहस्त्रम द्वे, सॉरी 2000 योजन, द्वे शते द्वे 2202 योजन. योजन is 8 to 9 miles. It's a unit of distance. एक निमिषा अर्धेन, एक निमिषा से आधे में सूर्य की रोशनी 2202 योजन तय करती है. सूर्य के ऊपर हमें सबसे ज्यादा काम मिलता है, एंड ऑब्वियसली आपको ये स्ट्रक्चर्स पे डिपिक्टेड मिलेगा. सो आई होप दैट आंसर्स.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
With the permission of our TIC, I think Ramneet ma'am is also there. We can call this session, we can wind up now, I guess. I can take just a very little question if there is something which students can't hold on. So we can have, they're asking for a book, but already time is going to up. Almost we have taken more than an hour.
Yeah, Divya ma'am, sorry. Yeah, I
Yes,
cannot
yes.
hold on one question.
Yeah, I knew somebody would be there.
Sir,
Yes,
if you
ma'am.
can you elaborate on the teacher training, the thrust area that you have been doing over the years. So, what is the focus area as far as your engagement with teachers is concerned?
Ma'am, I believe that teachers, there is one big lag that is happening. Now, even if you look at the national education policy that has now come up, it talks about liberal arts. It talks about innovative teaching and learning, which has been our core method for centuries until the Industrial Revolution teaching system came in. So if you want to go back, you need to understand the concept of multiple intelligences and interdisciplinary learning. So when I am standing in class 6, in class 6 we are teaching a child about, in geography we are teaching a child about maps and landforms. In civics we are teaching about politics. In mathematics we are teaching about mensuration, measurements. Now you cannot create a map without understanding measurements, distances. And also, if a trader, we are also talking about traders and pilgrims in political science, civics in class 6. So if a trader has to come from Istanbul to, let's say, Lahore, he will be crossing 3 to 4 different, not just time zones, but even landforms, which means the kind of food he is carrying, that will vary, which means the chapter of food in science comes into play. What I'm trying to say here is that if you pick up one topic, almost every subject gets covered in that topic for 1 or 2 classes. It's all up to the teacher how that topic is picked up. Right now, what is happening when a child is sitting in the school, period bell rings, he has to close his book, put it in his bag, pull out another book, restart his mind as if something new is going to happen. He never realizes that what he's going to study is connected with his previous class of a different subject and might also be connected with the next class that he's gonna sit in. So my point here is, what I'm doing with teachers is I'm trying to bring all the subjects together on one platter where you pick up one idea or one experiment or one game. So that's why I develop so many games when I do my teacher training workshops. I take these games, many of these games are associated with history. Many are just simple science games, but I do use examples from history. And then we talk about it. We just play those games, and through that, I try to teach.
Yeah, thank you, sir. We can surely think of a workshop with you further with our fourth years who are there in the field
Sure,
and
sure.
teaching. Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Ladija, ma'am.
it will be fruitful for them. So I think we have reached to the end of the event, and we have found it. Yes, sir.
Just one thing, since there are a few more questions, what we can do is, if anybody has any question, now the time doesn't permit, you
Yes,
can
yes.
ask me directly. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere you can find me at Delhi Heritage. Just put my handle Delhi Heritage, you can easily find me, and you can ask whatever question you have.
Yes, Gurjot, Aditi, I think they are asking something. They are keen to ask. They
So
have
I can
asked for
answer
the
there.
books also.
Running short of time over
Yes,
here. I can
yes.
ask over this. I can answer there.
See, sure, sir. So, what I was trying to just wind up this session, and really, we are so much thankful to you, sir, for this enriching session indeed. And I mean, everybody would be agreeing that you really took us to all of us to that beautiful virtual walk to that site, and very conveniently we had gone with you there. And somehow we also went in the flashback journeys we made with you with our other batches in past. So nevertheless, your talk explained all the significant aspects, all the elements of the monument, and you really connected them well with the historical, architectural, socio-cultural, and all those aspects which were relevant for the to understand that site. In fact, and especially those beautiful stories, which really connect with the monument, and they make us hear them again and again also. So you gave enough opportunities also to our students to think about the heritage and the way they need to connect them for their everyday classroom curriculum. So I think that's a good session, and I would say it's again a beginning for us. And many more sessions we would be likely to plan, and especially we are just waiting to get this lockdown over so that we can really go to the site and have a feel of the thing in a real manner. In the end, I would be taking this opportunity to thank my principal, Professor Harpreet Kaur, who has always been supportive enough for beginning this lecture series. Our TIC, Dr. Ravneet Kaur, who has been always standing as a pillar of support for us. Dr. Anshika, who is a colleague to me and a really an active collaborator to make this event happen. and all the participants, including faculty from the department and other departments as well, from history and other departments. I can see the in the participant list, and last but not the least, our students who have really made this evening meaningful and with their reflective questions and their interest shown in the talk. So I just want to close this talk again with a warm-hearted thanks to the sir, our resource person. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
And
Thank
a thanks is also due to Ms. Divya Sharma, who is also an equally